Hey guys, in this video I'll be analyzing the 1993 Mr. Olympia to see how close it was between Dorian Yates and Flex Wheeler. I believe the early 90s was sort of a crossroads for bodybuilding because the disparity between aesthetics and mass was growing ever larger. I feel like the top two at this Olympia clearly showcase this, as on one hand you have ultra aesthetic prime Flex Wheeler, and on the other one you have a massive chunk of prime shredded muscle in the form of Dorian Yates. Now, before we do get into this video, if you guys could like and sub, it would really mean a lot to me, as it does help support the channel. With that all being said though, let's get into this video. Alright, the front double is the first pose of this comparison, and here you can see the argument that I was making earlier in full effect. Dorian presents a bulkier, less aesthetic look, but has a drier quality to his physique, along with more mass in the calves, forearms, chest, and lats. Flex, while not as dense, has far better arms, a tighter, slimmer midsection, and superior quads. Flex's longer limbs help him create a much more pleasing outline and X-frame, almost outshining Dorian's conditioning and muscular qualities. He looks so good overall, with virtually no weak points, and the difference in conditioning isn't enough for Flex to lose in my opinion. While Dorian does have a great physique in this pose, Flex's quads and arm superiority, along with his perfect V-taper, are enough to win in my opinion. Although this picture is blurry, I really don't think we need a super high definition picture to tell who is winning. Not many can match Dorian in the front lat spread, and here really is no exception. Dorian has lats that are twice as bulbous as Flex's and flare out tremendously. His shoulder to shoulder width is much greater than Flex's, and his quads look so much better now, mainly due to a change in Flex's own posing, which makes his quads look smaller than they previously did, and it closes the gap between the two. Sure, Flex does have a more impressive set of arms, a better V-taper, and a genetically superior shape. However, Dorian completely outmuscles him here, and does look far better. That being said though, Flex looks great on his own, and it is quite possible that a judge in the early 90s might have favored him for his more pleasing and aesthetic look. The side chest is a really good shot for both of them, but they do present unique and differing qualities. Flex looks so round and full in the chest, arms, and shoulders, has a razor-sharp midsection, and a huge side leg. Dorian, while not as round or full, has a granite-like quality to the muscles and the, skin overall on his physique, which makes him look shredded to the bone. Now, both do have similar levels of muscularity and a detail in the side leg. However, the angles are a bit off, so we can't be 100%. Now the upper bodies are pretty close, however Flex's bubbly round muscle bellies really draw my attention. His arms, delts, and chest all look more aesthetic and jump out to you, whereas Dorian's appear a bit flat, but he does have that amazing conditioning, keep in mind. Now in my opinion, while this one could go to either of them, I'm going to give a solid edge to Flex. His impeccable midsection and upper body, along with that rounded off outer quad, all help him pull ahead. I just think that his superior shape would win him the pose, especially against Dorian, who isn't necessarily the most aesthetic. The rear double should always be a knockout pose for Dorian, however, Flex puts up a really solid argument for a win. He has far better symmetry, just look at the traps for instance, Flex smokes Dorian in terms of the symmetry there. Now, Dorian does have much more density and thickness in the back, along with larger delts and forearms from behind, and surprisingly looks very comparable in the arms. Now, Flex does look more aesthetic in the upper half, though, overall. However, Flex is objectively, I'd say, worse in terms of a mass and conditioning standpoint. This second look shows you just how competitive they both were, and also shows them at a similar angle. You can now see the sheer size and thickness of their backs, along with a better look at the disparity in conditioning between them. Look at the feathering and striations within Dorian's traps and lower back, as well as the dryness of his glutes and hamstrings. Now take a look at Flex, it's honestly night and day in that aspect. Speaking of the lower body, Flex does have a great set of hamstrings and calves. In terms of size, however, the conditioning of his glutes and hamstrings pale in comparison to Dorian's. Looking at the shot as a whole, I think I would lean towards Dorian. He has a much better back and objectively wins in the upper and lower halves by virtue of size and conditioning advantages. Here's a look at the Christmas tree pose for both of these two, and this one really shows just how shredded they were. Flex is almost matching Dorian in the feathering of the lats. However, Dorian clearly has more separation in the glutes. Additionally, you can see the difference in the trap size and the thickness between the two in the back, as Dorian's appear twice as large. At a first glance, the rear lat spread looks like an amazing pose for both, as it appears that they showcase incredible thickness, separation, and size. While it may look like that, Flex has a tendency to not open up properly in the pose, making his rear lat spread unsymmetrical and sort of off-putting. In contrast, Dorian looks wide and imposing, and his lower body looks twice as conditioned as Flex is. This picture doesn't really portray the real scenario as well as I would want it to, so let's take a look at another picture. Here's a second look, and now you can see both rather clearly and from a similar position. Now it is clear as day who is winning, as Dorian looks twice as wide, thick, and dense, especially in the traps, and has a drier quality to his hamstrings and glutes. Not only does Flex look asymmetrical in the upper body, but his lower body, while rather big, has a film of water on it that obstructs any real details from appearing. This is an easy win for Dorian in my opinion, as he looks better than Flex in basically every area. The side tricep pose is a pose that Flex never really liked to hit for some reason, and in my opinion that does not let me accurately judge this pose. That being said, I still think that Dorian's imposing mass and conditioning, along with his picturesque posing execution, would be enough for him to win, although Flex does possess the superior tricep along with a more aesthetic midsection and impressive side leg. Dorian's grainy granite-like conditioning coupled with his near-flawless posing would be enough to win. I mean, Dorian even looks aesthetic in this pose, so for that matter, I think he would win alone. Now, to be fair, this pose is extremely close, or would be extremely close, since Flex does hit a rather impressive side tricep in his later years, like 1999, 1998, and that could potentially go to Flex if he was really hitting it at the 1993 Mr. Olympia. However, I don't have the picture, so I'm going to have to go with the one who's hitting it properly, and that's Dorian Yates. The ab and thigh is a really good pose for both of them, however, they do both have some minor flaws. Dorian has an incredible V-taper thanks to those flaring lats. However, his midsection looks really unaesthetic and doesn't taper all too well. His obliques flare out, making his taper look a little bit off. However, his midsection is tight and small nonetheless. Flex basically has Dorian beat in every aspect apart from the V-taper, as when he faces us front on, his V-taper is almost non-existent. This is because he doesn't have the widest structure, therefore limiting his potential V-taper. That being said, look at the midsection and the near perfect symmetry and cuts of the abs. He smokes Dorian in that regard. This second look does both of them a little bit more justice, as now the fine details come into the picture. You can see Flex's nicely feathered quads and obliques, and the anatomically perfect separation in the quads. Speaking of the quads, Dorian's look really unaesthetic yet massive, and those monster calves only add to the completeness of the pose. Additionally, guys, his midsection does look much improved from the last shot. So in terms of who I would have winning this one, I'd probably still go with Flex. You know, he is so much more aesthetically pleasing, and I don't think that Dorian's width advantage is enough to beat him because, Flex has that far better midsection set of abs and obliques, a much smaller midsection, and sure, he might not have the best V-taper. However, he just looks so picturesque and statuesque compared to Dorian, who really has no rhyme or reason to his aesthetics. The last pose of this comparison is the most muscular. However, keep in mind that this pose was not a mandatory one at this Olympia. In it, though, you can see that Dorian's width is carrying him in what would be a lackluster shot without it. That width exposes Flex's narrowness. However, Flex has much rounder delts, arms, and chest, along with those amazing quads that are just perfectly feathered. Now, Dorian does look respectable in the pose. However, it would benefit him to have a larger set of arms and shoulders to really complete it, as his chest almost overshadows the arms, and the delts barely stand out. So Flex would win this one, however, I'm not going to judge it since it wasn't a mandatory pose back in the day. Alright guys, that about does it for this video. In summary, I had Dorian winning the front lat, rear double, rear lat, and side tricep, while Flex won the front double, side chest, and ab and thigh, making this one 4-3 to Dorian. What really saves Dorian in this comparison is the fact that the most muscular was not a mandatory shot, and that Flex was not hitting the side tricep appropriately. Things could have been different on stage, keep that in mind, as Flex could have, really won the side tricep pose and could have possessed a proper, posing form. However, the pictures I have don't really showcase that. Still, I do think that Dorian rightfully won this Olympia, as his mass and conditioning was on a whole nother level at this show. He smoked everyone in those aspects and was far ahead of the rest of the pack. Honestly, this show was just one of the best in my opinion. And I think if Flex really did win here, it would have completely changed the entire sport of bodybuilding. If this had happened, I think that aesthetics and mass would have played a larger role in the judging criteria over, the mass and conditioning that we saw later on in the 90s. and we could have seen more aesthetic but less conditioned and massive guys win the Olympia instead. Anyways, that's enough of my rant. I hope you all enjoyed this analysis of the 1993 Mr. Olympia. Let me know down below what you guys thought, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.